I think it's actually a pretty good sign that creationists have stopped trying to make scientific arguments for their claims, and have instead fallen back on playing sophist word games. It shows that they really know that the evidence is not on their side. And sophist word games is exactly what Ray Comfort's new video, Evolution versus God, is all about. He goes to some campus and he asks students and professors what evidence there is for evolution. And he tries to argue that belief in evolution is really based on faith. Ray asks some folks, can you give some observable evidence that evolution is true, something that I don't have to receive by faith? And there's this one guy who replies, take a look at what happened 65 million years ago. And Ray says, hang on, I can't. That's 65 million years ago. According to Ray, apparently if something happened in the past, then there can be no evidence in the present that shows that it occurred. We might as well just throw out the entire field of forensics, because if something happened in the past and you weren't there, anything you believe about it is based on faith. Evidence in the present shows nothing, apparently. Well, if you want an example of empirical evidence that you can see in the present, Darwin gives one. In The Origin of Species, Darwin says, the most common case, especially with respect to very distinct groups such as fish and reptiles, seems to be that, supposing them to be distinguished at the present day from each other by a dozen characters, the ancient members of the same two groups would be distinguished by a somewhat lesser number of characters. So that the two groups, though formerly quite distinct, at that period made some small approach to each other. In other words, the further you look into the fossil record, the greater the resemblance that the fossils of one kind of animal bear to the fossils of other kinds of animals. Why would that be the case if evolution is not true? Why is it that the further we look into the fossil record, the more fish-like the reptile fossils look, until we reach a stratum where we no longer see reptiles, but we still see fish? If the theory that reptiles branched off of and descended from fish are not the explanation, then what is? Why are the fossils laid out in that pattern? What's the biblical explanation for that? Another trick he uses is a creationist favorite. Whenever a scientist brings up cases of observed speciation, one species of an animal evolving into another species, Ray says, oh, that's not proof of Darwinian evolution because it's not one kind of animal evolving into another kind. I'd like to ask Ray what his definition of a kind is, because creationists seem to use this word in whatever way allows them to dismiss whatever evidence and arguments are presented to them. No matter what evidence you showed them, they would just say, nope, doesn't count, that's not one kind evolving to another kind. For example, when you show them the fossil of the Archaeopteryx, they just say, no, that doesn't count as a transitional species between reptiles and birds. That's just a bird that happens to have some reptilian features. If evolution is true, what we should see is something like the crocoduck. Of course, this is completely disingenuous, because even if you did show them the fossil of a crocoduck, they would just say, nope, that doesn't count, that's not halfway between crocodile and duck, that's just a duck that happens to have some crocodilian features. So the word kind is used by creationists in such a way as to make the statement nothing changes from one kind to another unfalsifiable. His next tactic is asking people if they believe in intelligent design, and if they say no, he says, well, make me a rose. He wants people to spontaneously cause a rose to pop out of thin air. Because if a rose is not intelligently designed, you should be able to do that. How the fuck does that logically follow? And he asks people, can you make a rose spontaneously appear out of nothing? No, nobody can. That's why creationism is bullshit. How the fuck does that prove intelligent design? If anything, that debunks intelligent design, because I, as an intelligent being, cannot cause organisms to spontaneously appear. This is not what evolution says is possible. This is what creationists think is possible. They are the ones who think that a being caused roses and everything else to spontaneously appear. His next talking point is vestigial organs, and he says that the appendix and the coccyx, which are often cited as examples of vestigial organs, are really not vestigial. Those may not be good examples, but I'll put a link to one of AronRa's more recent videos where he goes through a much more extensive list of vestigial organs. The coccyx and the appendix are not the only examples. And then Ray goes on to ask if there are any moral absolutes, and if God doesn't exist, who makes the rules? He poses this question to P.Z. Myers, and P.Z. Myers says, well, we make the rules. Then Ray says, well, if Hitler made the rules, would that mean that his rules were right? Well, Ray, Hitler did make the rules, at least in Germany, for a little while. He doesn't make the rules now, nor do any of his followers, because his rules don't work. A society that is run according to the rules of Nazism is simply unsustainable. Whether moral rules promote survival and prosperity or not is the closest thing that we can have to an objective morality. Ray also asks if Hitler was acting according to the principle of survival of the fittest, and I would say no, he wasn't. Hitler believed that the stronger and more brutal you were, the better able you would be to survive, but that's not the same thing as survival of the fittest. Those who are the fittest are not necessarily the strongest. And among humans and other social animals, it is certainly not the case that the more brutal you are, the better you will be able to survive. If you go around picking fights, you are putting your survival at a far greater risk than somebody who does not. The reason Hitler died while hiding in a bunker is because he did not understand evolution. He didn't believe in the survival of the fittest, he believed in survival of the strongest. But the strongest organisms are not the organisms that are always the most fit for survival. Nazi Germany was a society that was profoundly unfit for survival. Evolutionary principles did not produce Nazism. Evolutionary principles extinguished Nazism. And then, of course, Ray moves on to his shtick where he says that if you've ever told a lie, you're a liar. If you've ever stolen anything, you're a thief. Regardless of how much good you've done in your life, if you've ever done anything wrong, you're a piece of shit who deserves to burn in hell. Because in Ray's twisted moral perspective, that's what justice is. And then he moves on to one of my favorite arguments, the you really know God exists and you're just pretending to believe in evolution because you want to sin argument. I wonder how this argument would work against a Christian who believes in evolution. If you have a Christian who fervently believes in God and follows all the rules in the Bible, but believes in evolution because he thinks that Genesis is a parable or a metaphor, then what sin is he trying to get away with? And what about people who follow other religions that are far stricter than Christianity? Say you have a Muslim who prays 5 times a day, he never has sex outside of marriage, never steals, never lies, and lives a far stricter life than any Christian does. He denies the divinity of Christ, but if he's denying Christ because he wants to sin, what sin is he trying to get away with? Some folks have asked Ray Comfort to release some of the unedited footage of his interviews. Because of course it's fairly clear that a lot of them are edited to make people look as dumb as possible. And Ray says that he will release the unedited video footage if somebody gives him TV coverage and a good reason to release it. I personally think that transparency would be a good reason to release it, but apparently transparency is of little to no value to Ray Comfort, but I guess that's really no surprise.